Welcome to episode 4 of Travelling Science. G'day legends, welcome back to Travelling Science, the show that's sharing science with the world. My name's Jesse Crow and I am the Travelling Scientist, coming to you today from Melbourne in Australia. I'm a health science communicator, and on this show, we interview doctors, researchers, and experts, hearing their stories and sharing their ideas that can help us to live smarter, happier, and healthier lives. Today's guest is medical scientist and genetics genius Eleanor Sava. Eleanor and I actually studied science together at the University of Melbourne for several years. But where I moved to microbiology and immunology, Eleanor studied veterinary science before switching into the field of genetics and getting her master's in biomedical science with a high distinction. Since then, she's been working as a medical scientist at the Royal Children's Hospital here in Melbourne, specifically in the Victorian Clinical Genetics Service, where she searches for genetic diagnoses by reviewing patients' genomes. And when she's not saving lives, Eleanor is actually the sweetest human being. She invited me around to her house on her day off, she cooked us an incredible soup for lunch, and after the interview she took me out to her garden and sent me home with a bag full of homegrown vegetables and herbs. It was so sweet. But before all of that, we had a great discussion where Eleanor answered questions like, how big is the human genome? Are humans still evolving? Is genetic testing dangerous? Why you should get carrier testing before having children? Are genetically modified organisms good or bad? Can we genetically modify humans? And why is baldness so common among men? We also covered topics such as bioethical issues, golden rice, rare genetic diseases, cloning, the new sex gene chromosome, Gattaca, our favourite genes, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, and ancient bananas. But before we get into this week's discussion, I'd just like to share a review of the podcast. Unfortunately, I still don't have any yet, but you can leave a review right now. All you need to do is go into Apple Podcasts, search Travelling Science, scroll down, and it says write a review. And you can write anything. You can say Jesse sounds like an angel, or he sounds like the devil, or he's insane, or he's awesome. You can write whatever you like, and I'll read it out, hopefully, on next week's episode. But now that's out of the way, let's get stuck into this week's interview, and just to let you know, there were some slight audio issues during recording, such as low-flying planes, strong winds, and an over-friendly cat. So if it sounds a little weird, that's why. But ignoring all of that, there's a lot of value in this discussion, so get excited to hear from my good friend and medical scientist, Eleanor Sava. Alrighty, Eleanor Sava, thank you so much for joining us on Travelling Science.
Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you. Maybe just to get started, would you like to tell us where you studied and what you studied at university?
Yeah, sure. I studied at the University of Melbourne.
Mm-hmm.
I did an undergraduate degree in science, which is where we met. And I then did a graduate diploma of science just to boost my grades a little bit, and then went on to do a Master of Biomedical Science there as well, in the Heim Lab, which was fantastic, really great experience. So yeah, that's my years of experience, and my cat is coming into frame.
No, that's okay. Jerry can get involved. So Eleanor has this ginger cat called Jerry, who is super sweet and sat between us getting head scratches and tummy rubs for most of the interview. So if you hear any meowing or purring during our chat, no, it's not a ghost cat haunting you because you secretly love dogs. It's just Jerry. Anyway, I asked Eleanor what she does for work since graduating her master's.
And so I'm now working at VCGS, which stands for the Victorian Clinical Genetics Service, based out of the Royal Children's Hospital, so here in Melbourne, and having a really great time there. I've been there for 5 years, so got that job pretty soon after finishing uni, which was fantastic.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I'm a medical scientist working there.
Ooh, and what does a medical scientist do?
So it really varies. In terms of what I'm doing, I will work in variant curation, which means that I am studying the effects of certain mutations in people's DNA. And a lot of the time I'm trying to see if those changes are causing or responsible for that person's condition. They might be affected with a disease, or maybe they have a family history of disease, and so they want to know if they have a risk of being affected. So it's both adults and children, but mostly children. And otherwise, we might be doing some gene curation, seeing if that's actually associated to disease as well. And that's kind of like a day-to-day for me.
Cool. So my understanding is that DNA is so vast. There's so much. There must be like millions and millions of bases. So when you say you look at people's DNA, like where do you even start?
That's a really good question. So each human has about 300 billion nucleotides or 300 billion pieces of DNA, which is staggering.
Staggering indeed. The actual number quoted online is around 3.2 billion, or 3,200 million base pairs, containing the individual genes for around 23,500 different proteins. And sometimes one single base pair changes randomly, accidentally, and this is called a mutation. And if that changes one of the 23,500 proteins, it can cause a disease. And it's Eleanor's job to find these mutations in people's DNA, somewhere amongst the 3.2 billion possibilities. Wild.
And so, as you can imagine, sorting through that manually would take quite a long time. The first human genome, it took 10 years to sequence, around 15 to 20 years ago now.
Yeah.
Cost $1 billion. So, thankfully, modern medicine's gotten to become more affordable and thankfully a lot faster than a decade. And so, it starts with bioinformaticians, who are people that work with coding. It's magic to me. I don't understand it at all. I think they're amazing with what they do. And so what we'll essentially do is put that DNA through some filtration. So it's AI-based filtration. And so mutations that are really common in the day-to-day, so you have them, I have them, I don't want to see those because clearly they're probably not causing disease. We should be just fine. Otherwise, we'll all start with about 200,000 mutations. So we'll compare someone's DNA to a reference, which is kind of considered normal.
Yeah.
And so we've all got about 200,000 of these changes. And so it's all about getting it down to a more digestible, manually feasible quantity, which might be about 50, maybe 10, just depends what we're looking at.
Right. 50 or 10.
Individual changes.
Right. Let's take a step back for a second. How do you even get the DNA? So you said that the first human genome took 20 years or more. 10 years to sequence. And now, how long does it take to sequence someone's genome now?
It's really incredible. So under emergency situations, so the day-to-day person couldn't request this test. It's only if there's medical significance. We can do a whole genome, and we can do that in as quick as 3 days.
3 days?
3 days.
Wow. Okay. Actually, I thought it would be a little bit quicker, but okay, so you can sequence somebody's genome and get that down in about 3 days' time, and then depending on the patient, can you look at, sort of where to look specifically?
Yeah, exactly. So we have what we call gene lists. So lists, as the name suggests, of genes that we know cause a particular condition. So if someone's coming to see us because they have a hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, so their heart's, malfunctioning in a particular way, we have a list of genes that we know cause hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. So those are the genes that I want to look at. I don't want to look at anything else.
Yeah.
And so that way it really, really helps significantly with the filtering, that we can really get it down to a much smaller pile of lists. Sometimes it's just one, and that one is the cause. Easy peasy.
Yeah.
Makes my job a lot easier.
Very cool. And what sort of diseases are you looking for? Is there like a sort of common thing that you might see day to day, or?
Yeah, so working in the children's hospital, as you can imagine, a lot of congenital onset, so really, really early onset syndromes. That's probably going to be my bread and butter, the most common thing that I see. So usually some kind of intellectual disability, maybe there's other things involved in terms of certain organs, but it's really anything. So people with certain skin conditions, heart conditions, maybe there's a family history of Alzheimer's. They want to see if they're at risk. We can do that.
Right.
With a lot of counselling, of course, but it really varies, like ataxia. So issues with movement, neurological, anything that you can think of at the body that could go wrong, there is probably a test that we can do to maybe try to find a cause. Now, different conditions will have different likelihoods of us finding something. So, for example, lung problems don't tend to be very genetic, so we're very unlikely to find something. Immune-based problems, so issues with your immune system, are also less likely to be genetic. So again, your prior likelihood's a lot lower, but then other things, it's like, yep, I know exactly what I'm looking for, and you just cross your fingers that you find it.
Right. So those things that you mentioned would be less genetic. Is that more like environmental factors, or is there other, just spontaneous mutation perhaps?
Spontaneous we should hopefully find, but environmentally influenced for sure. Maybe sometimes the kid's a bit premature, so they came out really early, and that could be that's just what's caused their problems, unfortunately. But yeah, so mostly environmentally influenced. So sometimes things are genetic, but it's not just one mutation or one change causing the problem, it's many all working collectively together, and unfortunately things like that are a bit out of scope for us. There's so many genes out there, there's so many things.
So much potential for something to go wrong throughout the
and
DNA.
Ultimately we don't know what every gene causes, we don't know how they all work together. So maybe it is genetic, but it's 100 different things working together or against you together to cause that particular problem.
Yeah, right. And in cases like that, are those sort of what we might consider rare diseases, or?
Not necessarily. So there's a statistic, and I'm probably going to get it wrong, but there's a stat out there that if you add up all the rare diseases, they make up something like 20 or 30% of all disease.
According to the Genetics and Rare Disease, or the GARD Information Center, a rare disease is classified as a disease that affects less than 200,000 Americans, which is less than 0.06% of the population of USA. Now that doesn't sound like much, but there are over 6,800 of these diseases, which collectively affects over 30 million different Americans, about 9% of the population of USA. And that's just in America. A few examples of rare diseases are things like cystic fibrosis, Huntington's disease, and Duchenne's muscular dystrophy. I always get dystrophy wrong. And Duchenne's muscular dystrophy. And that's just 3. There are like 6,797 more of these diseases.
It's really important that rare diseases do get our attention. And hopefully in the future, with appropriate funding, we can get there, and we can give each disease the attention it deserves, and ultimately there's a person behind each incidence of that rare disease, and we owe it to them to try to help, and whether that's through a diagnosis or through treatment. But I strongly believe that knowledge is power, and we have to try to empower people as best we can.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said. Are there any big challenges that you face in your work? Any really serious issues you have to deal with?
Yeah, we deal with bioethical situations almost every day. Things that you aren't sure if you've made the right decision. So an example of that could be, there might be a situation where a child is in because they have a syndromic intellectual disability, and that's our primary focus. But testing the child's parents can be extremely helpful to us, because if I see the child has a mutation, I'm like, okay, that's interesting. But I could see one of the parents also has it. More often than not, that's a deal breaker to me. Like, I don't think this is causing the child's condition, because if mum has it and mum's absolutely fine, it's probably not causative. So it's really, really helpful to us to also test mum and dad. But sometimes we find things in mum and dad that they're not aware of that isn't what we're looking for. So an example of that could be a mutation in SCN5A, which causes Brugada syndrome, which is a cardiac problem. Now, our filtering system should exclude that, so we shouldn't see it, but other conditions might, or other mutations might sneak through. We want to try to avoid those kinds of situations as best we can. Now, when people are consenting to testing, they'll be made fully aware of this, hopefully, and they'll be told that, hey, there's a risk we're going to find things. Do you want to know? Do you not want to know? And they can opt out, so there is that safety involved. in terms of safeguarding people's privacy, if that's what they wish to learn or not learn.
Yeah.
So if they do, however, say, yes, I want to be informed of this, which we call incidental findings, there is a chance that we will stumble upon something unpleasant, and that thing could be life-limiting or could be really detrimental to their health in the future.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's probably one of the hardest parts of the jobs is finding these things that don't actually help your patient at the end of the day.
And is that the case that maybe they're finding out something that they just didn't need to know? It might not affect them at this point in time, but in the future it could have a negative impact, and it's just sort of getting them worried when they might not need to worry about such a thing yet.
That's definitely some of the hardest decisions we've ever had to make. So when I'm analysing a mutation, I need to give it a ranking or a classification.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm only going to report mutations that reach a certain classification.
Yeah.
And if they don't meet that, that's it. We're not going to report them because we don't want to worry you over something that's potentially harmless.
Mm-hmm.
And so we get in these very, very difficult situations where if this mutation is causative,
mm-hmm.
it's going to have a huge effect on this person's life. They might need to get a transplant, like
mm-hmm.
a heart transplant or kidney.
Yeah.
They might need to get a pacemaker put in, or if in the case of cancer, which unfortunately is quite common, we'll find that you have a mutation that predisposes you to cancer.
Yeah.
And the problem there, of course, is that you now have to make some significant life decisions if you're going to change your diet, change your lifestyle. Do you need to get cancer surveillance just to constantly check, especially for things like breast cancer? We can do mammograms, we can do something. So the problem lies in if the decision as to whether or not that mutation reaches the reporting threshold or doesn't can be very, very difficult, because if I overcall it, I think this is causing disease, but it actually isn't.
Yeah.
You and the rest of your family who has that mutation is now going to go through all these counselling, therapy, huge trauma. You're worried day and night if you're going to get cancer.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's a really, really difficult thing to tell someone. If you tell them when you didn't need to, that's problematic. And in the opposite sense, if I undercall something, I don't think it's causing a problem, but it actually is, and they don't report that, we could have saved a life, because they could have been getting those mammograms, those checks. Now they're not. And next thing you know, they're finding out they have cancer, but it's far later rather than catching it early, because they're aware of that risk.
I can't even begin to imagine trying to make that decision. So that sounds really challenging.
It can be very challenging.
Just on that note, that's raised a whole bunch of questions, but the first one I might ask just quickly is, would you recommend, or who might you recommend should be getting tested for things like cancer? Is that something where you need to be looking at your family tree, or is there some test you can do to check for everything, or?
Yeah, so it really depends what you're trying to achieve. So people that are maybe thinking about starting a family, I would absolutely highly recommend carrier screening. So the idea behind carrier testing is there are certain conditions, certain syndromes that are caused because mum's carrying a mutation, dad's carrying a mutation. Individually they're fine, but if the kid was to inherit both of them, that causes a significant issue.
Yeah.
So carrier testing is just checking two people that may be planning a family, and we will look for if they're both carrying a problem in the same gene.
Yeah.
And then we could say to them, yep, you're actually high risk. Maybe they could consider doing IVF or maybe prenatal screening. There's things that we can do. So
okay.
That's, I think, extremely important. It can cost a bit of money, but it's something we can do that is non-invasive, and we can stop a lot of kids being sick if we find something.
I think that's super important for someone who's planning a family to just know things like that, because the one we always learnt about at university was cystic fibrosis, right?
Oh, huge, especially amongst Caucasians.
Yeah, 1 in 15 chance that you might carry the gene.
Yeah.
Which is not a problem, but that makes the chances of two people that might be carrying the gene to have a child who has cystic fibrosis, the chances are low, but if it happens, it's just awful for the family.
And I know there's been some new medications for cystic fibrosis specifically, but in the past, the only cure was a lung transplant.
Wow.
So it's a huge, huge impact to life, and there's countless conditions that are like that, significantly impact life, quality of life, but there's no fix. There's no medications. There's no magic pill that you can take that's going to make it all better. And unfortunately, those cases are, they do break your heart sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. As well as carrier screening, cancer screening, is that a thing? Or is it, I suppose it depends on if you have a family history of a specific cancer?
Family history is critical here.
Yeah.
If you have no prior history of anything, I'd imagine maybe you still can get testing, but it might be a little bit harder. You might be put down the priority list because there's others that are more higher likelihood of finding something. They might go first.
Yeah.
But absolutely, sometimes we'll do testing where, granddad had a heart attack at 30, dad had a heart attack at 25, and it's like, okay, there is clearly something going on here, and they're fit people, they're so young.
Yeah.
Something might be going on genetically, then yes, we can do that testing.
Going back to bioethics, I wonder, this is just a sort of random question, I wonder if you're on the train of, you hear rumors about the potential of changing somebody's genes. Are you like, no, that's not ethical, that we shouldn't be interfering with people's genes? Or are you like, bring it on, let's have babies with gills so they can't drown and glow-in-the-dark children and things like that? What do you think about that? Or is that very futuristic, dystopian?
I think it depends how far we want to take it. So gills, nah.
Yeah,
that's a fair way off. It is a bioethical pit. It's really, really challenging. I do get concerned sometimes that our legislation is not keeping up with the advancements in the technology. So we're building these fires, but we don't have the necessary fire extinguishers to put out the fire.
Yeah.
So one case that really comes to mind is the attempts of CRISPR out of China in 2019. So the background there was that these people were HIV positive, wanted to have children, and the scientists said, yep, we can alter your genes to guarantee that you can have children that won't inherit the virus, because it can be transmitted during childbirth and, of course, gestation. But that was a bioethical mess on multiple fronts. Like, the parents were not consented appropriately. I don't think they fully understood what they were consenting to. There's amazing medications now to help people with HIV to minimize how much virus they're shedding.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of safer solutions. And so instead they used this new technology called CRISPR, which won the Nobel Prize in 2020 from memory.
CRISPR stands for Clustered Regularly Interspaced Short Palindromic Repeats. These DNA sequences come from bacteria, where they work to protect the organisms from bacteriophages, which are literally viruses targeted to bacteria. Anyway, scientists figured out that CRISPR can be used as a genomic editing technique, allowing them to remove and add pieces of genetic material with surgical precision. It can be used to turn bad genes off or good genes on, and it basically allows us to manipulate the genetic code of any living organism, which is great. But it can also be very dangerous, as you're about to hear.
And so CRISPR involves using gene editing techniques. And so what they did was obtain embryos from these people, gene edited them, and then the mothers were essentially surrogates for their own child. The problem with this technology was off-target effects.
Yeah.
So what that means is you think you're editing what you want to edit, but you might be making mistakes. Right. And so that is why gene editing in humans is very, very illegal. The scientists that did that went to jail. The whole labs got shut down, made a whole lot of new laws in terms of editing of human embryos. It was just a mess. So to answer the question, it depends. Because in that case, there were better, safer, available solutions.
Yeah.
And going down that kind of extreme was completely unnecessary. It comes back to the bioethical consideration of, is there harm in action or harm in inaction? So there are some patients of mine that I've had that they won't survive another year.
Right.
Like, it's that severe, and the quality of life is horrendous. Could we help them? Maybe. Are we going to do more harm in the process? Probably. So it's really, I think if we can do it safely and it's not purely aesthetic, so I want my children to be stunning and blue-eyed and red-haired, whatever it may be, I'm on board. But I think there's a lot of obstacles that need to happen between now and then that we can do this in a safe way.
So, genetically modifying humans, probably not the best idea.
Not yet. Not yet.
What about genetically modified organisms like food? How do you feel about that? Is that, I'm pretty sure it's already happening. Do you think it's safe? Is it good? Is it bad?
I'm definitely on board with that one. There is a lot of rigorous testing to make sure, especially consumables, so food that we eat especially, is safe. There's a lot of impact to check that it's not going to run wild in the ecosystems and destroy them if ever unregulated. Testing, and it's just so much easier to test a plant than it is to test a person if, maybe gene editing's gone wrong. So there's a lot more easier safeguards, safety nets, policy. There are very few GMOs in Australia at the moment. It's quite highly regulated. So I know we have GMO canola, which has been bred to be resistant to certain herbicides. And so you just spray your crops with all this herbicide and the weeds will die down, but the canola is just fine. Right. So it's really helping with manufacturing. But the one that really gets me going is golden rice. That one's insane. Never heard of golden rice?
Insane in a good way or a bad way?
So good. I teach my students about it. So billions of people across the world eat golden rice.
Yes.
Or eat rice, sorry. And so what they've genetically manipulated with this rice is to contain genes from, I think, a daffodil and a bacterium.
I know what you're thinking. Rice with daffodil and bacteria genes? Why? What in the name of everything holy were they thinking? Well, the daffodil gene codes for phytine synthase, and the bacterial gene codes for phytine desaturase. And where these genes come from doesn't really matter. The structural components of DNA are the same in every living organism. And these two specific proteins work together to naturally produce beta-carotene inside the grains of rice during growth. And when we eat the rice, beta-carotene gets converted to vitamin A in our liver. But wait, why is it called golden rice? Well, it's full of beta-carotene, which has a yellowy orange colour. And you know what else has an orange colour? Carrots, which are also full of beta-carotene. Think about it.
And it creates the precursors to produce vitamin A, which you're thinking, okay, cool, more vitamins, what's the big deal? Vitamin A deficiency is one of the leading causes of blindness in children.
Right.
They're just not getting enough of this vitamin, so hey, give them rice.
Yeah.
And now they're consuming this rice, and that's producing enough vitamin A for them that they're avoiding blindness. So it's huge impact in terms of, again, preventable disease, so preventing the problem before it comes about. And so GMOs for agriculture, it's more from a profit perspective, which I'm obviously not really interested in.
No.
But from a health perspective, so golden rice is phenomenal for that. And certain countries they're a bit more hesitant towards bringing it on board.
Yeah.
Because, hey, it's genetic modification, we don't understand it, we are, afraid of it. Maybe there might be some religious context in there as well.
Yeah.
And that it's not natural. But I think people are seeing the benefits of it. It's been around since the 90s, I think. And so the impact on preventing blindness in these children has been amazing. I think more and more communities are getting on board. And of course, education is critical as well, to tell people, hey, it's safe for these reasons. It's going to help in these ways.
Yeah.
And it's a little frustrating at times when people use the it's not natural argument, because I don't know if you're able to show a picture at this point.
I can show a picture. For anyone who's watching on YouTube, here's a picture of
a banana, like an old banana.
Yeah.
Not a banana you'll find in the supermarket now. We're talking bananas as they're found in the wild. And as you can see, hopefully, they're super seedy, they're tiny, there's not much flesh. And so we've been able to, agriculturally, through selective breeding, take it from this seedy, tiny, sad-looking thing to potassium-rich bananas, which are obviously great. And
tasty, healthy, abundant, cheap.
Great. And we did that over the course of thousands of years of selective breeding. Have we altered the genetic makeup of this banana for our own purposes? Yes, absolutely. But we did it the old school method of breed a banana, find one with slightly less seeds. Okay, breed that banana, rinse and repeat. Genetic modification is just speeding up that process. We can get there. We could technically make golden rice in a natural way.
Yes.
It'll take maybe hundreds, maybe thousands of years. So rather than wait that long, let's do it in a safe, controlled way, and people can get the benefits now rather than years from now.
I like that. You've got me on board. I have another question. This might sound a little more conspiracy theorist. I'm not sure. But thinking of companies like Ancestry, 23andMe, would you say it's necessarily a good idea or not a good idea to use these companies to sort of test your own DNA? It's quite convenient and easy to do. You just send them a sample and they send you back some information about your genetics. But you hear the rumors that once they've got your DNA, it's theirs. They can do what they want with it. They can sell it to other companies. They can potentially use it in the future. Do you know any? Can you speak to that at all?
Yeah, I have heard of things like 23andMe and all that being used to solve crimes. Like they'll find DNA at a crime scene, run it against the database that they have, and find maybe not a great match, but a match that proves that these two people are not. There's a relationship there, and then I was being told about this just recently that they found like the murderer's third uncle twice removed, but from there we're able to get a little closer to eventually help solve the crime. So in that sense, I don't know if the person who actually did the 23andMe or Ancestry, I'm not sure which, understood that their DNA could be used in that way. Obviously, then that's a bioethical issue in and of itself in terms of...
So in 2018, the Golden State Killer was caught because one of his relatives got their DNA tested, and police were able to match the relative's DNA to the DNA left at various crime scenes. Then they basically figured out that if it wasn't the person who did the DNA test, then it's probably someone distantly related to them. Now, the laws around this are confusing and complicated, but basically, if you or a relative gets their DNA tested, police are technically allowed to access the database containing those DNA samples if it's an emergency, if they're trying to solve a crime.
I guess it's a mixed bag. I'm sure there's probably going to be some misuse of it as well.
Yeah, so if you're thinking of committing a crime, don't get your DNA tested.
Don't do 23andMe. No. Or do it, then we'll catch you.
Do you have any book recommendations or movie recommendations in relation to your field of expertise?
Definitely could read more. I don't read enough. Gattaca is an amazing film.
Classic.
A lot of us would have had to have studied it back in high school for English.
Yeah.
Everyone hated it. I loved it. So the premise of Gattaca is that gene editing has been a thing, and most people born in that era, futuristic era, have been edited. So there's like minimal disease, and then those who haven't been edited are like the underclass, disadvantaged, and that's all about one of those people sneaking through the ranks and trying to become an astronaut. And the soundtrack is phenomenal. Seriously, good stuff.
Gattaca is a movie that's nearly as old as me, but definitely much cooler. It's got Jude Law from Alfie, Uma Thurman from Kill Bill, and it's even got Dean Norris, who played a cop in Gattaca. And he also went on to play a cop in another little series you might have heard of, Breaking Bad. It's Hank, and apparently he plays a cop in everything. He's been in like 35 different movies and TV shows playing an enforcement officer of some kind. Isn't that crazy? But anyway, back to Gattaca. The title is spelled Gattaca, which is clever because it's a movie focused on our DNA. And the title only contains letters from our DNA, which is made up of A's, T's, G's, and C's, which stands for adenine, thymine, guanine, and cytosine. That's about all I remember from watching the movie in high school, but I'm going to watch it again, just for you, Eleanor. Eleanor, I've got some listener questions here for you, if you are ready.
Yeah, I'm ready. Let's do it.
Awesome. Before we do, though, every week here at Travelling Science, we donate to a charity of the guest's choosing. And this week, Eleanor has chosen to donate to the Rare Disease Foundation, which supports children and young adults with rare diseases. The foundation helps these young ones to get the proper diagnosis and treatment that they seriously need. And do you want to tell us any more about this foundation?
Yeah, I guess it's just highlighting what we talked about earlier today, which is that, rare disease collectively makes up a huge proportion of people in our healthcare system, and it's really important to give them the resources we can. That, yes, you might be 1 in a billion, literally, in terms of how rare your disease is, but you're still a person. So it's just great if the organisation gets that bit of extra funding.
Yeah, and I imagine if you're one in a billion, it's incredibly hard to find anyone to help you. It's charities like the Rare Disease Foundation which are important and helping these very unfortunate, unlucky people to get a chance. So a donation has been made to the Rare Disease Foundation on behalf of Eleanor, and if you'd like to support the Rare Disease Foundation, you can find a link for that in the show notes just below. And if you'd like to support Traveling Science, where we make donations to these charities every single week, you can find the Traveling Scientist on Patreon, and that link is in the show notes just below as well. As for listener questions, Gazelle wants to know if you know anything about the new sex gene chromosome. Have you heard about this at all?
No, really?
Eleanor didn't know about this one because she's busy saving lives. But don't worry, Gazelle, I gotcha. So quick background, if a baby is born with two X chromosomes, it develops into a female, but if it's born with an X and a Y chromosome, it develops into a male. But the Y chromosome is much smaller than the X, and it's degrading. Over time, scientists believe it's going to eventually disappear. So when will it be gone? In about 11 million years. So probably nothing that we need to be concerned about today, but just to satisfy your curiosity, scientists have shown that both the Japanese spiny rat and the Eastern European mole vole don't have Y chromosomes. Yet they're still able to differentiate into both males and females via other genes in their DNA. So sometime in the next 11 million years, we're either going to destroy the planet or evolve a new sex gene. And even if neither of those things happens, I feel like females will be able to run the planet just fine without us. Eli's wondering if there's a difference between inherited and acquired traits.
Oh, yes. So if they're meaning what I think they're meaning, so inherited traits are things that are purely genetic in terms of inheriting them from mum or dad.
Mm-hmm.
And so...
Things like eye colour, hair colour.
Yeah.
Skin.
I mean, they might be polygenic traits in that they're contributed to by many different genes, but still traits.
True.
Whereas acquired is things that we have throughout our lives. So, for example, I've got a few burn scars on my arms from too much baking. That won't be passed on to my children because it's not affecting my genes and not affecting especially the germline of my genes, so sperm and egg.
Right.
If they mean acquired mutations, so we're talking more purely genetic, yes, unless those mutations affect your sperm or eggs, they cannot be passed on. And that's why a lot of mutations that cause, say, cancer, if we're talking about like from, say, UV radiation or maybe mutagens, which are chemicals that alter our DNA, they typically wouldn't be passed on because they're affecting, say, your skin cells or your brain cells or wherever the cancer pops up. So there is a difference.
Right. Very cool. Kimson was wondering, are there any new sort of genes that are evolving in the modern day? Like, is there any sort of beneficial... Are we still evolving beneficial genes, or do you think maybe that's not happening anymore because they're not being bred out because of modern medicine?
Yeah, for sure. So because of medical intervention, we are absolutely slowing down or at least altering human evolution from a genetic sense. Certain things are still being driven, like for example, it really depends what the beneficial mutation is in a way. So there's studies showing that people that are, say, ballerinas or gymnasts, so people have to be really flexible, have mutations in collagen genes where collagens contribute to our joints. And so because they've got these mutations, they're extra bendy. People that are like, elite athletes are often found to have small mutations that maybe affect their lung capacity, maybe affect their red blood cell count. So more red blood cells, more oxygen around the body, they can run a little further, move a little faster. So you could argue that yes, we are still evolving in that sense. We are not really in a hunter-gatherer society anymore to think that running that little extra further will make you evolutionarily elite and therefore having plenty of kids and then they all pass on their genes. So yes, in the sense of there's definitely some mutations out there that make us more advantageous in certain circumstances, like that's the principle of evolution, but it wouldn't really shape our evolution as a species as much as it maybe did even 2 centuries ago.
Yeah, that's a cool way to look at it. I didn't know about dances and
Oh, it's so weird.
with more
Yeah.
collagen and more bendy and flexible. I think I don't have any of that because I'm very not flexible.
Ehlers-Danlos is a really semi-common condition, I'll put it that way. It's an aortopathy, so it's affecting all that kind of tissue.
Yeah.
And it's really common in people who are Jewish because of founder effects.
Oh, wow.
And so, because they're not really breeding outside of their religion, there's a higher prevalence of Ehlers-Danlos within those communities. And the typical traits that your skin's really stretchy and your joints are super hyper flexible.
So I'd never heard of this. Ehlers-Danlos syndrome is a group of heritable connective tissue disorders. Symptoms include joint hypermobility, like you can touch your wrist with your thumb, which I definitely cannot do, and also skin hyperextensibility, which is like crazy stretchy skin. And that all sounds weird and cool, but it also causes big problems, like tissue fragility, where it's super easy to dislocate a joint or rupture your blood vessels, and wound healing just doesn't work properly. So yeah, that's Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. Not fun. One more listener question. Jimmy was just wondering if you were able to shed any light on male inherited genes, things like baldness or color blindness.
I mean, I wish I had a little whiteboard I could give you guys a quick inheritance and pedigree lesson. But essentially, as most females, and we have to kind of keep it more broad because, of course, there's people in our society that are, just a little bit different, and that's totally fine.
Yeah.
Typically, most women will have two X chromosomes, and most men will have an X and a Y chromosome.
Yeah.
And so because we have two, and they have one, if there is a mutation on the X chromosome, then most of the time the males will be affected because you've only got the one. And so you've got no backup X chromosome
Right.
to kind of rescue you in terms of maybe being affected by a particular condition like baldness, colour blindness. Whereas most women having two X chromosomes, we need both X chromosomes to carry that mutation to then be affected. And so our frequency of being affected is far, far, far lower.
That's awesome, Eleanor. Thanks for answering those listener questions. And if you have any listener questions, you can follow Travelling Science on Instagram and keep an eye out for our next speaker and send your questions in so we can ask the experts. Just before we finish off, I've got a lightning round if you're ready.
I'm ready.
6 questions, 60 seconds. What is your favorite genetically modified organism?
Oh, yeah, golden rice. Helping people, preventing blindness. I like rice. Everyone likes rice. It's
That's a good one.
nice colours. Yep.
If you could clone yourself, would you?
No one needs more of me. One's plenty.
If you didn't become a scientist, what do you think you might have done with your life? You've done something completely out of the science realm.
Oh, my husband tells me I would have made a good lawyer. So I'm
Wow.
quite good at debating things, though my capacity to rote learn information is dreadful. I can't remember anything, so maybe not lawyer. Maybe more like CSI style, like detective.
Detective or lawyer? Very cool. What's the best part about your job?
What do you love about
I always get to learn. I'm constantly learning. There's always new genes we're discovering, new diseases to learn about. We're always improving.
That's great. What's the worst part of your job?
The worst part would be the incidental findings. Yeah, those really, really difficult decisions. If we've made the right choice, knowing someone's life's about to change forever and not for the better. Yeah, that's
tricky.
the tough ones.
Yeah.
And last question. What is your favorite gene? Do you have a favorite gene?
I do actually. It's really lame.
No, what is it?
I really like ZFHX3
ZFHX3.
because I had a really, really difficult case and we found the mutation in that gene. It was a brand new gene. We hadn't really heard about it before and managed to just piece a lot of pieces to an incomplete puzzle together. And got the diagnosis for the patient, but also for their father, because dad was a bit affected and ended up having that mutation as well.
Oh.
So it was really, really interesting.
Look at you, saving lives.
Not saving, just helping a little bit.
Helping out.
Helping a little bit.
Well, I think you've helped a lot of people and you continue to do so. And thank you so much for coming on Travelling Science today. We really appreciate talking with you. And just to finish off, considering everything we've discussed here today, do you have one final piece of advice you'd like to share with our listeners, something that they can take home and potentially use to improve their lives in some way?
Yeah, so it's a little unconventional and unexpected, but my advice is don't be afraid to quit. So there's a lot of negative connotations around quitting. People think that they failed, that they can't give up on their goals, and I think it's really important to find closure in knowing that you did your best.
Mm-hmm.
So long as you've given it your all and you can say, yep, you know what, I gave this everything, I'm okay with this. And then it's totally okay to walk away from that. So my story is that back when I started uni, so we started together, I was trying to do veterinary. Mm-hmm. So be a veterinarian, maybe look after my cat a little better. And all the subjects to do with that I did not do well in at all. And it was my passion, it was my dream, it's what I wanted since I was 10 years old. I was now 20. My grades at uni were plummeting because of those subjects. It was just not a good time. So I'm left with an undergraduate degree of science and not much in the way of job prospects. And so I was thinking, what am I going to do now? And saw that they were offering graduate diplomas of science where you could basically try again, but with less subjects. And I had the option of zoology or the option of genetics, and there was nothing else really in the biology field. So I had a choice to make. Do I keep chasing this or leave it and try genetics, which I hadn't really touched since high school, which at that point had been about 3 years. So I thought, okay, you know what? I'll give this genetics thing a go. If it's just not for me, that's okay. I don't have to finish this other degree. Let's just leave it, but give it a go.
Yep.
Ended up being kind of a prodigy at it, got a scholarship, really, really good at it. And if I just kept focusing on the vet dream, I never would have had that. I wouldn't be here on this couch as an expert in something. And so giving up on that was the best thing I ever did. And I started to think, geez, if I gave up sooner, what could have happened, you know?
Yeah.
So my advice is don't be afraid to quit. If you gave it everything, you robbed yourself of the opportunity to maybe be happy doing something else. Yeah, that's my advice.
So there you have it, legends. That was medical scientist Eleanor Sava teaching us all about genetics. And there was some great actionable advice in there. Like, if you're thinking of starting a family, look into carrier testing. It might cost a few $100s, but the information that can be gained could save you and your family a lifetime of struggle. Also, when it comes to disease in general, look to your family tree. The health and history of your parents, grandparents, and even further back can have a huge impact on your own health. And if you have any concerns for the future, you can take action by going and getting your genes tested today. Finally, Eleanor's advice was don't be afraid to quit. And she was studying veterinary science for years before she decided to quit because it just wasn't working. And once she made that decision and moved into genetics, her life changed so much for the better. And I know that many people might start something, whether it's a job or a degree or even just a personal project, and they can spend months or years working on it, but it's just not quite what they expected it to be. But they won't quit because of the principle. They've just put too much time into it already. This is also known as the sunken cost fallacy, and that's just what it is. It's a fallacy because you can quit at any point. This is your life, and you should do whatever feels right for you. And as Eleanor said, the sooner you choose to quit something that just isn't working, the sooner you can start something new. And that new thing just might be your true calling. Anyway, that's all for today, legends. Thank you so much for listening in to Traveling Science, the show that's sharing science with the world. Make sure you subscribe for more Traveling Science every single week, and make sure you check out Traveling Science on Instagram, where you can check out the upcoming guests and send me your listener questions. Also, check out the Traveling Scientist YouTube channel, where you can get shorter, more visually appealing videos all about science. Finally, if you stick around to the end of each episode, I always leave you with a little secret. And in the inspiration of quitting, this week's secret is that in 2017, I got my first official science job in a science laboratory, an environmental laboratory where I thought I'd be saving the planet. Well, I wasn't saving the planet. In fact, we were using gallons of harsh chemicals and creating tons of waste, all in the name of making money for this corporate company, and it just did not feel right. So I quit and became the traveling scientist. But what a lot of people don't know is the reason I quit is because I saw really crazy cheap flights online to Czech Republic. And I just had to book them. It was such a good deal that I just booked it without realizing that the travel dates were in just a few weeks' time. So I had a choice to make. Do I keep doing this job, which just doesn't feel right? Or do I quit my job and travel the world? And so obviously I quit my job, started traveling, and that's how I became the traveling scientist. No regrets. Anyway, cheers for listening, legends. I'll catch you next Science Sunday.